So another measure of how we're doing, it's one thing to say, are we actually burning acres? It's another to say, are we burning those acres with the frequency with which they would have burned historically? And so this map is basically a zoomed in portion of the south rim. Here we have the village again, grand view, and remember this whole area was Ponderosa pine. And what I'm showing here is in dark green, this area has burned once. Lighter green, these areas have burned twice. Orange is 3 times, and a little bit of red is 4 times. And this is how many times has this area burned since 1980. And remember that most of this south rim area, we don't actually do a lot of wildfire. We've got a couple, but most of this activity is prescribed fire. And so how do these numbers kind of shake out? In the south rim Ponderosa pine, we've actually burned 86% of the south rim Ponderosa pine since 1980, so we've made a lot of progress. About 41% of it has burned once and 36% of it twice. And so remember I said 10 years or less generally for Ponderosa pine. So we're talking about 30 years, and we've got a good portion of the landscape burned twice, some of it actually burned 3 times. I included the PJ here because there is some mix into the Ponderosa there, and we haven't burned much of it, which is pretty much consistent with PJ. It doesn't burn readily, doesn't burn without a lot of wind, and the fire return intervals are really long, so we would expect that we hadn't burned as much of that. On the north rim, we've also done a lot of work in the Ponderosa pine down here, so this is the same view from the north rim. We have Ponderosa pine here, here, there, and there. And you'll recall the map that I just showed you of that fire this year would actually turn this whole plateau a light green too as we do that next year. Most of our Ponderosa pine has burned a couple of times, and then we have some fires that have occurred in the higher elevation forests too. And so in the north rim, we've burned actually 98% of our Ponderosa pine. I think after this year that might be 100%, but I'm not sure. 37% of it once, 47% of it twice. And so we're actually making great progress in restoring fires to the Ponderosa pine on the north rim too. In the mixed conifer, which has a less frequent fire return interval, we've restored fire to 61% of the landscape, and the spruce fir fire has returned to 27% of the landscape since 1980. Well, how about on the ground? What do things look like on the ground? We've gotten fire in there, but has the fire actually done anything? So our objectives to date have more or less been restoration-based objectives. So we know that things have changed from the past, and we're trying to restore things back onto a trajectory that they might have otherwise been on. So most of our objectives have been toward restoration so far. And that restoration is basically restoring surface fuels to the level that they might have otherwise been, reducing small tree densities, retaining large trees, and allowing patches of higher severity fire as indicated by what would have happened in the past had fire been burning naturally across the landscape. For surface fuel, we're making great progress. We have significant reductions in fuel. You can see this picture is the kind of before and after. So before the fire, this was the surface fuel. In this plot, and after the fire, we made these reductions. And so during the first fire, we reduced surface fuel in all fuel types. During the second fire and the third fire, it gets a little more complicated because in those first fires, you kill some of the overstory trees, you burn some branches, more things fall on the ground. And so the trends aren't as clear. In the first fire, we're certainly reducing things. In the second fire, we don't see much reduction. And then by the time we get to the third fire, we're reducing things again. And so we have lots of moving parts in the surface fuel area. For the small trees, again, kind of a before and after picture. In a lot of cases, we want to reduce these small trees because there are a lot more of them than there otherwise would have been, or the wrong kind of tree has made its way into the forest. So we have Ponderosa pine forest where white fir has moved down the slope because of fire suppression, and those white fir wouldn't have been there otherwise, and it's our job to kind of reduce those. And so we have seen significant reductions in small trees in all of our forest types, but from historic reconstructions, we are still a bit high on a lot of those, and so we still do have more trees than historically were there, but we've made great strides in reducing those. And again, the second fire is much more variable, and so that depends on, if you don't have the surface fuel to burn and get enough heat onto those small trees, you're not going to reduce them. And a lot of times in the second fire, you just don't have that. And some places you reduce, and some places you don't. For large trees, for the most part, especially in our lower elevation Ponderosa pine, we haven't been killing a lot of large trees. We've been able to retain maintain most of our large trees with our burning. In the higher elevation forests, we do lose more large trees, but again, those forests are adapted to more severe patches of fire in general. So losing larger trees in those higher elevation forests is actually expected and part of the natural condition in some cases. As far as severity, this is again the South Rim area. Remember, most of the South Rim is Ponderosa pine, and this is our severity map, and you can see there's a lot of kind of blank spaces in here. That's actually where we have PJ mixed into the Ponderosa pines. Remember I said that didn't burn very well, so we get a lot of unburned patches in there. But in here, you don't see a lot of the red. You don't see a lot of the higher severity fire, and that's what we want. Ponderosa pine didn't historically have big patches of high severity fire, and so we want to restore it to where it also doesn't have big patches of high severity fire. We've been able to do that pretty successfully in the South Rim. On the North Rim as well, remember the Ponderosa pine are on these plateaus, you don't see a lot of patches of higher severity fire on the North Rim, so we've done a great job of restoring fire to what I would consider its natural state there. As you move higher up in elevation, remember that higher severity fire is a part of those systems. We do see more higher severity fire in those systems higher up. So kind of the final thoughts here, we do have lots of research on historic forest structure and historic fire regimes directly related to the park that can inform our management. We have 4 major vegetation types that we manage with fire, and we use a range of strategies to manage those vegetation types. We've begun restoration work on 94% of the Ponderosa pine and 61% of the mixed conifers, so we've made a lot of progress since 1980. Our fuel reduction targets have been met in most of the types. We do have probably more small trees than normal in Ponderosa pine, but we're making strides there. And then our higher severity fires have occurred, but mostly in those forest types where it was historically present. And that's basically it. I'd like to thank the Grand Canyon Association, and I'd also like to thank our GIS specialist, Erica Dula, who made all of these maps for you guys to look at tonight. And I'd like to acknowledge a whole host of people who've worked on the fire ecology and fire effects programs since it began in 1990. A lot of people have put a lot of effort into compiling data and getting that data back into the management.